but in my spare time, I do a lot of work in the LGBTQ plus community. So I am a volunteer for Middlesex Pride as the community engagement officer. I am a volunteer for Rainbow Films. Our documentary Pride and Protest will be shown on BFI Flair online on Sunday. And I also write. I've been featured in a few places like Metro UK and GMFA, and in a bisexual anthology called The Bible Volume 2. And I'm currently writing a book on bisexual men. I guess one of the most important things to mention is I'm also a co-founder of the AmBIssadors, which is a bisexual YouTube channel, which I have founded with Lo, who is joining me today. And my pronouns are he, him. I think I missed that.
So yeah, I'm Lo. I'm the other half of the AmBIssadors. On our YouTube channel, we talk about bi issues and our experiences of being bisexual and some of the experience we've had. I am a content writer by day, and by night, evenings and weekends, I'm a bi activist. I run the Bi Survivors Network, which is a network for bi people who've experienced domestic or sexual violence. I also sort of spearhead the UK, the England branch of Be With The Tea. I wrote the Do Better By Us manifesto. I do a lot of ad hoc activism and organising, and I'm also writing a book, which should be out next year. It's for teenagers about understanding bisexuality better. It's everything I wish people had told me when I was figuring myself out as a teenager. And I've also written a lot of content about bisexuality, which you can find out on the internet.
Amazing. So I guess the first thing that we should probably start with is, what is allyship, or what does allyship mean to us? So do you want to start with what allyship means to you?
Yeah, that's such a big question because so many things can be allyship. But I think overall, what is allyship? I think it's just supporting a cause that you don't necessarily have skin in the game or all of your skin in the game, and supporting it as wholeheartedly as you would if you did.
Yeah. I think for me, when we talk about allyship, we have to be really careful because I think a lot of time allyship falls into performatism. I think a lot of the time we see people, like we said it before, who will be like, oh, hashtag trans rights, and like will write it everywhere. And it's like, okay, but what have you ever actually done to help trans people? And I think a lot of people kind of fall flat on that. And I think it's especially an important topic when we're discussing, because right now we're discussing a lot of stuff around what it is to be not racist versus anti-racist. Whilst I want to make sure we don't co-opt that, I think it's really important that we understand that in other realms too. Of a lot of people say, oh, I don't discriminate against you guys. It's like, yeah, but that's not enough. You need to be doing more. If you're going to call yourself an ally, you need to be going that one step further and actually, like you said, putting your energy into a cause like it affects you personally.
Yeah, because there's going to be people in your life that are affected by that cause. And I think something a lot more people are waking up to now is that all oppression is linked to each other and that none of us can be liberated until we're all liberated. So fighting for each other's causes, even if they're not necessarily our oppression, that is fighting for all of us. And, you know, there's no queer liberation without Black liberation. And so we all need to be, you know, Black allies right now. And I think, you know, we can apply that framework to a lot of other things, like you said.
Yeah, I think two things I mentioned there is like, yeah, we know that they're interlinked. I think you and a few other bisexual people have coined that famous phrase of like, scratch a transphobe, find a biphobe.
Yeah.
Because it's so often the case that when people are airing transphobic views, they're just one step away from airing a biphobic one. And there's a phrase that Lady Phil says a lot, which I always like, where she always says, my fight has to be your fight, and your fight has to be mine. And I think that is what allyship means to me, is like actually treating someone else's fight as your own. And I think even further than that, a lot of the time, it's recognizing your privilege in certain circumstances and making sure that you stand up for people who don't have the privilege. Because, for example, like me as a person of color, every time race issues come up, it takes a lot of my energy, and it takes a lot for me to not get angry over it, because obviously it affects me so personally. And when you have that level of privilege, it's not going to hurt you as much. You're a lot more shielded from it hurting you personally. And I think at that point, if you take it upon yourself to be a sort of a human shield and stand in the way of that kind of bigotry and fight the fight for them, so they don't have to do the work, because it's a lot more draining for them.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to ensure that you're fighting the fight, but without talking over the people you're fighting alongside and fighting for. As a white woman, if this lighting that's washing me out isn't making that obvious enough, it's really important for me, if I want to, be an anti-racist ally, to make sure that whilst I'm fighting for this cause, I'm not speaking over people or putting myself in a position of leadership or of organization that I can't possibly be in, because I don't fully have the lived experiences of what I'm fighting against.
Yeah, no, exactly. I will also mention, if anyone has any questions, feel free to drop them, and we will be checking them sort of every now and then. I think we have one question at the moment. Is the 27th June march suspended? As far as I'm aware, yes. I don't work for Pride in London, but as far as I'm aware, it is suspended.
Yes, I'm pretty sure all mass gatherings are not going ahead, guys. Sorry to ruin your summer, but
yeah. So I guess let's start on a light note of, do you have any examples of good allyship, like people who have sort of stood up for you in terms of what you are and your identity?
So I've actually started noticing online in, I would say, maybe the last year or two, more LGBT people who aren't bi are starting to stand up to biphobia, whereas previously, you and I, and I'm sure a lot of other people know, that the internet is a very biphobic place. We have, discourses every couple of months. There's a lot of misinformation. But I'm starting to see now, as those kind of, those tweets go viral about bi people, whatever it is, that more and more like gay men, lesbians, trans people, ace people are starting to step in and stand up for bi people, which is something that I hadn't really seen. I grew up on Tumblr in 2014, and it was a dark place, and there definitely wasn't anyone standing up against biphobia then, unless they were bisexual. And so I'm definitely starting to see, online at least, a lot more allyship and support and community. How about yourself?
Yeah, I would say sometimes I have seen a little bit of an uptick, but it does seem still depressingly quiet. But I have noticed that the more I talk about it, the more people are trying to realize it, and the more other people are talking about it, the more people are realizing that something needs to change. And I have some friends who are very aware of some of the difficulties now, and they will try and make sure that they give up platforms to me. So I've had a few people sort of invite me to panels or events or stuff like that, and say, hey, we don't often hear from bisexual people, we often don't hear from bisexual men, and we really don't hear from bisexual men of color. So we have this thing that we want to talk about. And sometimes it is like, oh, we want to talk about bisexuality, and I'll invite me into that. But noticing that people are starting to invite me to things that aren't necessarily just, oh, the token, invite them in, right? Like, oh, it's intersectional, so let's invite intersectional people. It's bisexual, let's invite the bisexual. They're trying to get me involved in other stuff. So we're like, oh yeah, I'm doing a panel on video games, and I know you like video games. Do you want to talk about that? And oh, I know you work in technology, and you work as a software engineer, so let's get you in to talk about that. Because I do find it quite frustrating at times when a lot of the time people will just invite you to things because it's what you are, not really considering the fact that you have other things that you can talk about.
Yeah.
Someone has
I
asked,
think as well,
as we're emerging from the pandemic, what can the community do to support one another now? We will be addressing that later.
I just want to add on to what you were just saying as well, especially about panels, is that I'm starting to see a bit more regularly now that LGBT events, LGBTQIA plus events, are starting to invite bi people in without it being a bi specific event.
Yeah.
So previously, you know, there'd be events and maybe one day would be like bi themed, and so they'd have bi panelists, bi guests, bi entertainers, whoever. Whereas now I think we're starting to see a bit more, and it's still not great, there's still a very long way to go, but of LGBT organizations inviting bi people in to just acknowledge that bi-ness is part of this big rainbow super family that we're all in, rather than only to focus on bisexuality.
Yeah, no, I've noticed that as well. I think, like you said, it has a long way to go, but yeah, definitely it's getting better.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now I guess we should talk about the negatives. So what negative experiences do you have with allyship?
With allyship in particular, or with biphobia and people not stepping in?
I guess all of it really, and it doesn't just have to be biphobia, but like the other parts of your identity as well. Because I know you identify as gender fluid, so parts like that as well.
Yeah, I guess for me, being both bi and kind of, I identify as like a gender fluid woman, which means like I describe womanhood as like my base camp, and then sometimes I go on little like gender hikes, but I always normally come back to womanhood. So I'm still kind of figuring that one out. But I guess with both those identities, it's just a lot of erasure. Like, even though I'm in a relationship with another woman. So often our relationship is labeled as like a lesbian relationship, even though neither of us really feel any connection to that word. And like my gender is often erased. Like people use she pronouns for me, even though I use she, they pronouns. And I guess it's just something that's really important allyship that you don't see much of is other people stepping in to kind of help combat that erasure, to be like, don't call this event a lesbian event if it's for all queer women. That's something I would definitely like to see more of. So for me, it's a lot of erasure. I've experienced like a lot of biphobia as well. I'm sure we all have, all bi people. But yeah, erasure is the big one. How about yourself?
Yeah, I think similar. I think a lot of the time, because we know that a lot of spaces are quite dominated by gay men, I'm often just seen as another one of a gay man. And the second I like, people, I've had it a few times where like a straight woman would be in that space, like it might be someone's birthday party and they've invited all of their friends who are all, queer men, and they would invite them all into the space, and then they might have a few straight women friends who they'll invite in, and they'll be like, oh, I love being in the space full of gay men. They feel safe. They feel safe because it's like, oh, no one's interested in them. They can just do whatever they want. And I'm like, some of us are. I actually had this conversation with someone. I was like, some of us are bi here. So if you are going to go around and like dance up with men, just remember the space that you are actually in, and you may actually be giving someone the wrong impression. And I think a lot of people aren't very mindful of that. A lot of people aren't very mindful of the space that they're in, and they will see all of the men as gay, or they'll see a straight couple. And we've talked about this before. They'll see this straight couple, and they don't realize just how amazing they're being to other identities, not just bisexual people, but non-binary, trans, intersex, asexual are all just erased the second they mention straight people. So I think we get a lot of that. I think a lot of the time, I often find a problem with talking about race in LGBTQ plus spaces, because LGBTQ plus spaces are just white. And the second you bring up race, it's something like they feel like they understand because they're marginalized, but they don't. and they'll go, oh, well, like I'll talk about cultural appropriation. I'll be like, oh, but they don't mean to offend, I think you're taking it too far, and it's like, am I though? Or are you just very white and you don't get it?
Yeah.
And then I start talking about white privilege, and I'll be like, whoa, that's a bit, and I'm like, but it is white privilege. Like, that's not an offensive thing to say. And I think a lot of people live in, I showed a diagram about the different zones when we talk about anti-racism. A lot of people live in that fair zone of they're really worried about being challenged, and they really can't be challenged about this kind of stuff. And I think until we get past that, we can't really live in a society that's anti-racist, because if you're not okay with being challenged, then you're never going to be okay with learning. Like, challenging is the first step.
We're getting a lot of questions about, is Pride happening this year? Unfortunately, there's no parade this year. We don't actually work for Pride in London. We're just lucky enough to have been invited on to do this live. But yeah, no parade this year, I'm afraid, guys.
I guess since we're on Pride in London's platform here, I think we'd be remiss to talk about Pride and Pride in terms of allyship to bisexuality. So it's a big topic, but I know you talked about this before and you've written blogs about it. So do you want to start us off with like Pride and the allyship to the bisexual community and how you feel about it?
Yeah, so I was part of the project to get the first ever bi float into London Pride Parade. And that was in the 47th year of London Pride existing. So obviously there was a big ball dropped there in terms of having bi people in London Pride. And that was a great thing for me, but it also made me realise that was the first time that I'd ever seen a bi float ever at Pride, and I'd been going to Pride, Brighton Pride, for several years before that. And now I know we have Bi Pride UK, who make sure they're at every Pride parade, or as many as they can get to. Because often bi people just aren't at Pride. There's not many Pride floats, there's not many Pride walking groups. Like you said, if you're in a different gender relationship, you feel quite erased at Pride. So I think a lot of prides have a very long way to go to make themselves more bi inclusive, and a lot of that also means making them more accessible monetary wise. You and I have spoken about this a lot. Bi groups get the least amount of funding of all LGBT groups, which means that most bi groups can't afford to pay the fees to get into these parades, or the fees for tabling. My network that I run, the Bi Survivors Network, we're hoping to do some tabling next year. We're going to have to do a lot of fundraising beforehand. I know Pride in London is offering this, what's the word I'm looking for? Community fund?
Yeah.
Community fund, sorry, completely bad. Is offering a community fund. I think that's a really positive step forward for grassroots groups, which represent, there are more grassroots groups for like bi and trans and ace, etc., identities. Not saying that there aren't a lot of gay and lesbian grassroots groups, but they tend to have a bit more funding. Unity Fund, thank you. So that's a great way to be an ally, is to just make it more accessible for bi groups and for lower income groups, and also to be very inclusive in your language. So if any of you want to check out the Do Better By Us manifesto, that's a manifesto that I wrote about bi allyship. So being careful in your language, not calling it gay pride because it's LGBT plus pride, not always referring to like same gender relationships, not just using same gender relationships in your advertising, all kind of stuff like that. How about yourself? How are your experiences at Pride?
So my first Pride, when I was kind of sort of out, like as in I'd come out but not to everyone yet, was Pride in London 2017. And that was the year when I found out afterwards that there was no bi float. Or actually, I think I found out before, And I was like, oh, okay. And I saw the whole thing kind of blow up, and a lot of the bi community were very upset. And there was all, the statement wasn't great around the whole, oh, no one applied, first come, first serve, and all this kind of stuff. And then I saw a lot of discussion around the monetary barriers to that. And I think that was quite upsetting to me, because I'd spent so many years denying myself because I didn't see bisexual as valid. And then for one of my first experiences of trying to go into LGBTQ plus spaces and seeing this whole debacle of like the bi not even being accepted there was really upsetting to me personally, because I was like, well, where am I supposed to go then if this is how it's going to be? And I think the way the bisexual community responded to that was really positive. I think the way that, you yourself made sure there was a flip the next year, that since then we've had Bi UK form itself. I think our community has leaps and bounds to sort of challenge that and to make sure that we are very visible in that space. So I think more of that and the sort of growing into that is really positive. I think what I want in terms of allyship is for a lot of pride communities and a lot of people who would go to sort of regular pride to be making sure that they're supporting these more fringe prides. They're going to Pride UK, they're tuning into their events, they're following them on social media, they're seeing what people have to say and actually learning from that. Because I think a lot of people, they'll see events come up from bi groups and they'll go, oh, that's a bi person thing. And it's like, sure, it is, but you could also be there because that's the perfect way for you to learn. You don't have to be there and take up the space. You be there to listen, right?
Definitely.
And I think, even a simple thing as like retweeting this thing or putting it on your social media and telling people about it is a really good way to make sure that that information is shared, so that people who do need that space are actually finding out about it. Because we have such smaller bases, it's really hard for us to get that grounding and to get people actually seeing what we're doing, which means that it's harder for us to reach our own community. To go more general in terms of sort of my intersections, I think I talk a lot about race, and I talk a lot about the difficulties of being in places like Pride in London when I'm a bisexual man of colour. And I think there's a lot that can be done to make people of colour feel more comfortable. I think we've talked about it a lot in the Black Lives Matter movement, but having cops at Pride will obviously upset a lot of people. Black people are more likely to suffer from police brutality, and we know queer people have suffered from police brutality. So when we're talking about Black queer people and Black trans people, seeing cops at Pride is obviously going to be quite triggering for them. And I think it's very much time that a lot of these communities, such as Pride in London and other Pride communities, listen to that and take that on board, and they're hearing the people from the community and making sure that everyone feels safe in this space. Even going one step further and talked about armed forces being there, especially when a lot of people come from a lot of other countries to places like Pride. We need to make sure that they all feel safe in that space. I understand the argument that people have of wanting these people, like police and armed forces, in that space, but you got to realize that a lot of people just aren't comfortable with that, and we're just not there until we root out systemic racism from these organizations.
Yeah, completely agree.
And I know that you marched with Be With the T last year, and I think having stuff like that is so important to make sure that our trans people are made to feel safe from all of the attacks of in the media and in other spaces on trans people. But we need to make sure that we are talking to those actual communities and reaching out, which I think wasn't done in 2017 when there was no BiFlow. And I think that to have allyship, we need to start reaching out to these communities and understanding what they want and what they need to feel safe in that space, and making those
100%.
changes.
It's about, pulling up the people who are still going to make the next step that you're currently on, right? Like reaching down and helping pull people up. We need the people in the LGBT community who maybe have more visibility and resources to reach down and pull up the communities who have less visibility and resources. And I think we're starting to see that happen, but it's a long, long way to go. So just going back to something you were saying earlier about money, is like the UK bi community like runs fully on spite, because we have no money, we're tired, and we're angry all the time. So I think just bearing that in mind when you work with bi communities is really important, that all of us are volunteers and all of us are burnt out and all of us have been burned in the past, but just making sure you reach out to us and help us with that work and help us with the monetary side of it as well is like so important.
Yeah, because I think we often say that bi community is one of the shoestring, where the shoestring has been found at the back of the couch.
Yeah.
And it's like digging to find that money. And I think you said on one of our other AmBIssador videos, it's just the same £20 note that everyone's just passing around each other. It's like, oh, you need a £20 now, you take the £20. And I think you're right. I think we need to make sure that people understand a lot of the funding issues that the bi community have, and lending a hand in that way.
Yeah.
So I guess a good way to close up is what do you want to see more people doing to support the bi community?
I guess just be enthusiastic about us. A lot of the times in queer spaces, and I'm talking more about queer spaces because this is to a queer audience. I doubt there's that many cishet people tuning in, but if there is, hi, thanks for joining us. So in queer spaces, I feel like bi people often feel like we're either unaccepted at worst or tolerated at best. That's how I felt a lot of the time in queer spaces, in clubs, in the LGBT society at my university, for example. So being positive about bi people being there and actively including bi people, rather than just assuming, oh, this resource will cover you as well because, you're partially gay. We're not partially gay, we're completely bisexual. And that mindset of this resource will cover you because you're partially gay has led to so many issues for the bi community, issues with getting healthcare, issues with seeking asylum, issues with like fetishization and getting therapy and all of that kind of stuff. So making queer spaces actually positive and enthusiastic and welcoming for bi people, not just, oh, you can come to this because you're bi, but like, we want you here because you're bi and you have something to offer this space because you're bi. That's something I'd really love to see from more queer spaces going forward.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, because I think a lot of the time, a lot of communities, they'll say gay and bi, and it's like, that's not really targeting us and really reaching out to us and making sure that. And I think having more things that actually just don't include gay, that just bi specific stuff from more LGBTQ plus communities would be great to see. Because like you said, I think a lot of people aren't even aware of our issues. They aren't aware that bisexual people have worse mental health. They aren't aware that bisexual people have ridiculously low coming out rates. Like, for people who are watching, I don't know how many of you know that about 14% of bisexual men are out to everyone in their family, which is compared to 59% of gay men. And it's very similar statistics for bi women as well.
I think for bi women, it's something like 23% of bi women are out compared to something like 72% of gay women. And those statistics don't include non-binary people. You'd have to ask, I think it was Stonewall or Glad, why. I don't know the answer.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is like, when you talk about that number, it's like, oh, 14% of bisexual men. And it's like, what about the non-binary people of color? Like, the non-binary bi people of color, how many of them are out? right? And it just makes life a lot harder when you start to go into these sort of intersectional identities that are even more like, they're breaking it down by sexuality, but when you start going into the intersection, it gets worse and worse and worse. And I think it's really important to talk about that. For me, I think I would like people to talk about our issues more. I think a lot of people, they will talk about mental health issues, but they won't really talk about they won't break it down. They will just sort of use that average statistic. And I think when you use that average statistic, you say, X amount of LGBTQ plus people, you aren't really talking about the different people within that community and how some of them may be affected more or less. So I would like to see more of that. I would like to see more targeted information and targeted conversations. I would like to see a lot more things go intersectional as well. I think a lot of the time we don't go that far. We will say things like, I'll put a bi person in there and then a person of color in there, and then and it'll be very like one-dimensional. And I think if you could have a panel which is completely intersectional and everyone fits into this different category, and making sure that conversation isn't just talking about intersectionality, but talks about, it could be about anything. You can have an intersectional panel that's on any topic, but a lot of people don't really go that far when it's on more general topics.
Yeah.
So I'd like to see more of that. Well, I guess I don't know if we have any questions. I'm just checking.
I think we have one
about... Have you guys experienced Sorry, go on.
Sorry, I was just going to say we had one earlier about COVID-19 and what communities can do during lockdown to come together better, I think, as well. That was from earlier.
Yes. So do you want to start on that?
Sure. I think things like this are great. I know a lot of places and organizations are doing live streams. London by Pandas has been doing some really, really cool virtual drag nights, which have been a lot of fun and raised a lot of money for some really great causes. I think just, helping, like you said, boost and retweet things from different communities that you're not necessarily part of. Donating to hardship funds, if you can, is super important right now. Queer people, especially queer people of colour and trans people, have been hugely affected by lockdown and by loss of job stability. So donating is really important, or sharing funds if you can't donate is great. And just, I think, realising that when we come out of this, we've all gone through a fairly traumatic experience as like a society and as a queer community, and hopefully we can come out the other side of it being a bit more, loving. I know that's really cliche to say, but that's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah, I think doing things like this is probably the thing that I would recommend. That means like giving up your platform to someone else, and giving them a space to talk, and just sort of acknowledging those different difficulties. I think now is a really good time to learn about other people, so that we come out of this with a newfound knowledge and ways that we can help support people. There was a statistic recently from LGBT Foundation which saw that the increase in phone calls of biphobia went up by 450%. And I think that was compared to transphobia, which was 100%, and I can't remember what it was for homophobia, but it was less. And it was 450% for biphobia. And that says a lot about stuff that bisexual people have already spoken about, which is the violence in the home for bisexual people, and how we are more likely to experience intimate partner violence and domestic abuse that a lot of people don't talk about. And I think this is a really good time to be reading up on what bisexual people are talking about and understanding our struggles.
Absolutely.
There was another question which said, have you guys experienced biphobia within your families? And if so, how have you challenged this?
I'm definitely in the long game on that one. So I started coming out to my friends when I was 14. I think I tried to come out to my parents when I was in my teenage years, but I had a long-term boyfriend for most of my teenage years, and so I think they maybe didn't really believe me, didn't want to believe me, didn't need to believe me. And then, yeah, I've definitely experienced biphobia within my family, but because I'm so vocal and so loud and I talk about this stuff all the time, I think I've just worn them down. And they're starting to learn a lot more. Like when I started dating my girlfriend, my dad called us like lesbians and thought I was a lesbian now, and like slowly he's learning because I just won't shut up. And obviously that's like quite a privileged position for me to be in. But, it didn't start out that way, that I was directly talking to them about this stuff. It kind of just fed into their consciousness because I was talking about it so much online and writing so much. And then when I got this book deal, I started like talking about it a lot more as well. So I'm like the worst person to give this advice because I'm so impatient, but try to be patient if you can, if they're just maybe a little bit ignorant or don't understand. You can wear them down. If obviously you're in a position where you're facing violence or verbal abuse, and obviously that's not your fault, don't try and stay around. Don't try and wear them down. If you can, reach out to friends, to other family members, and try and get somewhere safe. And just remember that if you're a minor and you're experiencing like biphobia from your family, that you don't think you're going to be able to wear them down, or you can't forgive them, and that's totally okay if you can't and you don't want to. Then just remember that there's, you can leave your family, you can choose a new family, and the bi community is your family, and we will love you and look after you as best we can as well.
I think you put a post up on Father's Day that was like, I'm your dad now.
I'm your dad now. I'll teach you how to change a tire.
Yeah, I mean, I only came out a few years ago and I experienced similar things of sort of, my mom said to me, it's fine, just marry a woman and stuff like that. And I just sort of, I did a similar thing. I just sort of explained, that's not what that means, and this is kind of how it works. And I think there is a line between sort of just genuine ignorance and then arrogance. There's a line there. I think when sometimes people may come to you and they may present biphobic views, and at that point you can challenge them and you can all sort of explain where you stand on things, how it works. I kind of wear them down as well. In a similar way, I sort of will invite them to something I'm speaking at, or I will show them something I've written and get them to read it, and that will help them understand what I'm like and what this stuff means. But at the same time, though, like I said, there's a line between arrogance and arrogance, and when it gets to that part, you're allowed to distance yourself. I did it with my extended family where they sort of assumed I was gay and I said, no, I'm not, and they kind of doubled down. And there are other instances of that as well, which I'm sure I've experienced in many different ways. I've experienced that with race, I've experienced that with, when I'm talking about trans issues or any other stuff, where you will be challenging someone online or in person, and you will say, no, this is how it works. And at that point, you can tell by their reaction whether it's worth you going further or whether it's not. There's a moment where they will switch on and they will start asking questions, not in a defensive way, but asking questions in but I thought, and you can then challenge them on that and explain it to them. And you slowly break them down and you make them understand a new point of view. But there's other instances where they will become guarded, get defensive, start fighting you. And at that point, it's just not worth it because they're not going to listen, they're not going to learn. And at that point, it's perfectly okay for you to just go, this is a place that you can go and learn more if you want to go and learn more. I always say, Google is your friend. Google exists. You have the power of the internet at your fingertips, so you can go and use that. But it's okay for you to say, do you know what? I'm not going to put myself in this space. If it's your immediate family, whatever that means to you, you can leave the home if that's an option available to you, or you can, choose what information you share about your life. If it comes to sort of like with me, with my extended family, I just don't speak to them. That is what it is. And I think it is again a privileged position. Not everyone has those options available to them, especially in lockdown. But there's certain things available to you, and the community is here to support you. And there's places that you can go and access. There's outside projects in AKT, for example, who will help you find spaces where you can. If you're going to leave your home, you can find spaces that can help you with that.
And if they're just ignorant, send them an AmBIssadors video. Link them to our channel and we'll explain it for you.
Exactly. Like, I don't understand biphobia. It's like, well, there's a whole episode that's 20-minute long that you can watch about it.
There are so many resources that the bi community has already created that you can share with people. And that if from that step they don't take any more steps to educate themselves or still don't understand, it's okay to give up on lost causes. You are not Google, you are not the bi brand. That was a sentence that I read once. I think Robin Ox said that you are not the bi brand. You don't have to represent the whole bi community. You don't have to change everybody's hearts and minds. You have to look after yourself first. So just bearing that in mind as well, with family members, with friends, with whoever.
So the last thing I will recommend is that everyone that is watching, go follow a bi person. Go learn something about bisexuality that you didn't know before. Maybe go read the Stonewall reports. Go read our blogs. We both have blogs. We both have our channel, the AmBIssadors. You can find us on YouTube. We have about 200 subscribers now. So you can go follow us and go watch a couple of videos and learn something. I don't know if there's anything that you want to say to close us off.
Yeah, I guess, being bi is being queer enough. You don't have to prove yourself. It doesn't matter if you've not met the bi credential of having dated one of every gender. It's okay. You can just, if you feel like you're bi, you can call yourself bi. And if you're bi, you are welcome at Pride. You are welcome at all queer spaces. Don't let anybody tell you you're not. And yeah, thank you for watching. Please follow me on Twitter. I'm at Low Shearing. I will share the Do Better By Us manifesto after this, so you can read that, and that has some really great practical ways of being a bi ally in it. And thank you so much, Pride in London, for having me on.
Yeah, so I am Nintendo Mad 888. Very, very professional tag.
I love it.
Twitter, Instagram, and Medium. And you can find, if you just put that in Google, you'll find me everywhere. My name is pretty unique as well, so you can just Google my name and I come up.
Richard, do you want to remind people who maybe joined late?
Yeah, so my name is Vaneet Mehta. So you can put that into Google, VANEET MEHTA. And you can find me on pretty much every social media. I'm a very online person. And you can also find us, both of us together, on the AmBIssadors. So that's the, and then AmBIssadors, but with bi in the middle. So AmBISSADORS. I think that's how you spell. And you can find us on Twitter as well. So we have a Twitter and we're on YouTube. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening.
Thanks for watching it. Have a great night, everyone. Bye.